Who's that guy to the right? I have a picture when I was my dad and my. Are you ready? I had it right. Regeneration of Manchin.
You sure?
Pretty stout guy. Pretty steady little guy. Who's that? The picture. See who that is. Stand beside me. That's not you, is it? Well, yeah.
All right, guys. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a little after 4. I want to welcome everybody to another Little Kanawha Reading Series event here at Glenville State College this time. Sometimes we have them downtown at the Pioneer facility down there. We also have them at the public library, the Gilbert County Public Library, and we hold some of the events here at Robert F. Kidd Library on the Glenville State College's campus. We actually have 3 good headliners today. Before I actually introduce those gentlemen, I wanted to actually talk a little bit about one of our Emeriti faculty, talk about a little bit of their work, and read a little section of one thing they wrote about our campus. For those that don't know, I'm Jason Gumm. I'm the library director here at Glenville State College. And my passion kind of lies in the archives of this institution and studying the people that served us before us and trying to keep track of what's happening now for tomorrow's researchers. One thing that a former faculty member did was collect ghost stories, which is very relevant to what time of the year it is here. This fellow's name was Dr. James Gay Jones. He served here into the 70s. I believe he retired in 1976. I've been contacted several times over the years by people as far as California, Canada, different places researching his work, wanting to find out more about his stories. So he traveled throughout Appalachia, throughout West Virginia, and he would collect these stories and compile them into different works. And we have several of those up here, and I would like to invite everybody after the function to come look at the different books that we have around. A lot of his materials are actually on display right now. And this specific writing is about our campus ghost, if you didn't know. It's called Sis Lynn, and it's based around a murder that took place on this campus in February of 1919 of Sarah Louisa Lynn, who at the time lived in a house that's situated beside Clark Hall, very close to a building that used to be called Verona Maple Hall, which has since been torn down. That was a residence hall for young ladies at the time. And some of the items that I put out here for later is I have the original newspaper article that people can look at that documents the murder of Sis Lynn. I have some of the old reward posters, and I have actual replicas of the original article that people can grab and take with them. So the first thing I'm going to do is read some of Dr. James Gay Jones's work here, and he wrote about 3 pages on what he called a pampered poltergeist. Over a period of several years, numerous reports have been made concerning the presence of a ghost on the campus of Glenville State College. Its activities have been largely confined to 2 buildings located on the upper area of campus and in a cemetery located nearby. Its presence has been of such import that some students, a few members of the faculty, and building and grounds caretakers have given it serious consideration. It is the opinion of most observers of the situation that the presence of the ghost is directly related to a crime that was committed at that location more than now would be a century ago. In February of 1919, a woman by the name of Sis Lynn, she was actually Sarah Louisa Lynn, was murdered in her house there by being bludgeoned to death by 1 or more assailants who were never apprehended. In later years, the Lynn property was purchased for the college, and on the exact spot where the Lynn house had been situated, a dormitory for women was erected and named the Verona Maple Hall. A few years later, another building, now known as Clark Hall, was built in the space between Verona Maple Hall and the cemetery that adjoins campus, in which Sarah lies. In those 2 buildings, a variety of activities of undetermined cause have been heard and attributed to the ghost. This ghost is said to be a poltergeist, or a noise ghost. It seems to delight in making sounds similar to that of chairs being moved out of vacant classrooms, tapping on the plumbing, especially at night, banging on metal waste paper cans, opening and closing of doors, and cemetery gates, and a variety of other unexplained noises. Also, The turning on and off of lights in the buildings, as well as these located over the outside doors and at the front steps, has been observed in both daylight and night at both buildings. One student related that while he was working late one night in the basement of Clark Hall, he heard a strange noise. He decided to investigate, and on entering the stairwell that led to the second floor, he reached out to turn on the light switch. But before he touched it, the light came on. Thinking that someone upstairs had turned the light on for him, he went up the stairs to the fire door that closed off the second floor hallway. As he opened the fire door, the light went off and left him in a near total darkness. The only light to be seen was the red exit light over the door at the far end of the hallway. For several anxious moments, the student stood there, pondering his next move. After peering into the darkened hallway for a time, he thought he saw an object about halfway out of the hall that seemed to sway back and forth. He said it appeared to be about the size and shape of a black bear. Because of the darkness, he could not tell whether it was looking toward him or facing away. Cautiously, he moved backward and began to feel for the light switch without taking his eyes off the object. Before he could find the switch, the light came on, and swaying object in the darkness had disappeared. The swaying object in the darkness had disappeared. One night, while some students were walking past Clark Hall, they saw the draperies at the classroom windows open and close. The doors and the windows of the building were locked, and the night watchman, who had come from the building only a short time before, said he had not seen anyone there. At the insistence of the students, he reluctantly went back in for a recheck while the students kept watch on the building's exits. When the night watchman came out, he reaffirmed that there was no one in the building. A greater interest then developed among the students to keep watch over the area at night. Some took to taking sleeping bags to the cemetery where they maintained overnight vigils, while others patrolled the campus until late at night. Shortly after midnight, one student and his girlfriend decided to give up their watch for the night and strolled down the walk beside the cemetery on their way to respective dormitories. As they were passing the cemetery gate, they both were startled to see a dense gray mass slowly rising from the far corner of the cemetery and starting moving towards them. At first, they were so frightened they hardly knew what to do. After some chilling moments, the young man, who was quite religious, began to pray and to cite verses of Scripture. When he quoted, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve," the gray mist suddenly vanished. Shortly after the announcement was made that Verona Maple Hall was going to be torn down, concerned members of the faculty and students felt that a formal procession of welcome should be performed to orderly transfer the ghost from Verona Maple Hall officially to Clark Hall. When the time arrived for the ceremony, those who participated in the procession took it seriously and discreet in their manner, since some of them henceforth would be spending a great deal of their lives working in cohabitation with the ghost that resides at Clark Hall. So that's just a little, one of the few recollections that people have compiled over our campus ghost. And I thought that would be, timely. We're close to Halloween, and I'm unsure if students still camp out in the cemetery watching for the ghost. Maybe that could become a thing again. I don't know. So let's get to the bulk of our activity here. As I said, we have 3 guests today that are going to speak. We have Dr. Mark Manchin, we have Dr. Ed Wood, and we have Mr. Jesse Skiles. I would like to first introduce Dr. Mark Manchin. He is our 26th president. He was a 1976 Fairmont State graduate. We try not to hold that against him. He graduated from WVU with a master's degree in 1980. He got his doctorate from WVU in 1986, and his master's and doctorate were both in educational administration. He has served as a West Virginia State Senator. He's been a superintendent of 3 different schools, I believe: Webster, McDowell, Harrison, and he's also served on WVU's Board of Governors. And we have welcomed him, as I was saying, as our 26th president this past, would have been July 1.
July 1.
Yep. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Manchin to come up and do a reading for us.
Thank you. By the way, Jason, Sis, I had an opportunity to meet her last night at the president's house, and we had a chance to converse a little bit, and I asked her if she'd like to come to the open house next. So if you all want to, she said she'd be glad to. She said that, but last night she had a bit of a headache. So what a pleasure, and I really enjoyed this opportunity to speak about a couple things, but I'd like to preface the reading that I have here tonight with a little background and what first instilled in me the love of this subject. In 1948, and then I'll get to the excerpts from the book that I have chosen. In 1948, my father was elected to the West Virginia House of Delegates. He served Marion County. At the time, he was the youngest individual ever elected to the legislature. He had not yet turned 21. And when he arrived in the legislature, he noticed for many, many years as a young man growing up in Marion County that there was a dual school system in West Virginia, and for that fact throughout the United States. And that affected him profoundly. So he wanted to make a difference. Now, again, let me impress upon you, the year was 1948, and actually he introduced legislation in 1949 to abolish the dual school system in West Virginia. For those who are perhaps not aware of Marion County, there was a African-American school called Dunbar. And it simply was not equal to the other schools in the county. He felt that was wrong. So he introduced legislation in 1949 to abolish the dual school system in West Virginia. Now this is 5 years before Brown versus Board of Education. Long before the people of West Virginia were prepared, long before the people of Marion County were prepared for such legislation. But he felt it was the right thing to do. When he ran for re-election in 1950, he was soundly defeated as he finished last. In 48, when he ran, he finished first, and in 1950, he finished last. And my grandmother, one day brought to me as a young man a box. And in that box, she said, I want you to have this. This is correspondence and letters that people had sent to your dad right after he introduced the legislation. And it was the most vile, terrible language you could ever imagine. And it struck me how he took such a strong position when it wasn't popular. And today, everybody talks about equality, diversity, and embraces it. In 1949, there was no such embracing. So that had a profound effect on me at that time. And in my junior year in high school, we read a book that was required reading. That book was called To Kill a Mockingbird. For those who are maybe not familiar with it, it's a book about the Old South written by Harper Lee. And it was required reading for us. Now, many of my fellow students did not appreciate what it stood for and what it discussed. I did. And when I was asked to participate, I felt like that might be the appropriate book, at least to give an excerpt from it, to touch upon what that book meant to me. And as I look out here, Jason, as we look out here and see these books across here, I can tell how much I appreciate that and how great that is. And as I look out there, I see the book Going with the Wind. I am a great lover of that antebellum South. And of course, Jim Crow South. It's a fascinating time in our history. How far we've come, not only over the last 100 years, but in my lifetime, how far we've come. But as I look at the book, How They're Going with the Wind, I want to press upon you how much that meant to me, as I have a daughter named Scarlett, I have a daughter named Tara, I have a daughter named Kathleen, I also have a daughter named Crystal, and I have a son named Antonio. And let me give you some advice, gentlemen. I wanted one more child. I wanted Rhett. And my wife says, you touch me one more time, I'll slap you clear across this thing. So I said, just I want a Rhett. But she was not going to comply. But I do want to touch upon, and I'm not sure the time allotment. Of course, To Kill a Mockingbird had a profound social effect on this country. It's an award-winning movie and also a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. And I just want to touch on what the book, for those who perhaps are not aware of. To Kill a Mockingbird is a novel by Harper Lee, published in 1960. Instantly successful, widely read in high schools and middle schools in the United States. It has become a classic of modern American literature. Winning the Pulitzer Prize, the plot and characters are loosely based on Lee's observation of her family, her neighbors, and an event that occurred near her hometown of Monroeville, Alabama in 1936 when she was 10 years old. Despite dealing with the serious issues of rape and racial inequality, the novel was renowned for its warmth and humor. Atticus Finch, the narrator's father, has served as a moral hero for many readers and as a model of integrity for lawyers. The historian Joseph Crispino explains, in the 20th century, To Kill a Mockingbird is probably the most widely read book dealing with race in America, and its main character, Atticus Finch, the most enduring fictional character, and its main character. As a Southern Gothic and Buildings Roman novel, the primary themes of To Kill a Mockingbird involve racial injustice and the destruction of innocence. Thus the word mockingbird, which represents innocence. Scholars have noted that Lee also addresses the issues of class, courage, compassion, and gender roles in the Deep South. The book is widely taught in schools in the United States with lessons that emphasize tolerance and decry prejudice. Despite its themes, To Kill a Mockingbird has been subject to campaigns for removal from public classrooms, often challenged for its use of racial epithets. In 2006, the British librarians ranked the book ahead of the Bible as one every adult should read before they die. Reactions to the novel varied widely upon publications. Despite the number of copies sold and its widespread use in education, the literary analysis of it is sparse. Author Mary McDonough Murphy, who collected individual impressions of To Kill a Mockingbird by several authors and public figures, calls the book an astonishing phenomenon. It was adapted into an Academy Award-winning film in 1962 by Robert Mulligan, with a screenplay by Horton Foote. Since 1990, the play based on the novel has been performed annually in Harper Lee's hometown. To Kill a Mockingbird was Lee's only published book until Go Set a Watchman, an earlier draft of To Kill a Mockingbird, which was published on July 14, 2015. Lee continued to respond to her work's impact until her death in February 2016, although she had refused any personal publicity for herself or the novel since 1964. I want to very briefly and quickly, because I understand we have other readers here, but I do want to touch on the summary, the core summary of To Kill a Mockingbird and its profound effect on society even to this day. The story was told by 6-year-old Jean-Louis Finch. Takes place during 3 years, from 1933 to 1935 of the Great Depression, in the fictional tired old town of Macomb, Alabama, the seat of Macomb County. Jean-Louis Finch, nicknamed Scout, lives with her older brother Jeremy, nicknamed Jim, and her widowed father Atticus, a middle-aged lawyer. Jim and Scout befriended a boy named Dill, who visits Macomb to stay with his aunt each summer. The three children are terrified yet fascinated by their neighbor, their reclusive author, Boo Radley. The adults of Macomb are hesitant to talk about Boo, and few of them have seen him for many years. The children feed one another imaginations with rumors about his appearance and reasons for remaining hidden, and they fantasize about how to get rid of him and out of the house. After 2 summers of friendship with Dill, Scout Jim finds that someone is leaving them small gifts in a tree outside the Radley place. Several times the mysterious Boone makes gestures of affection to the children, but to their disappointment, he never appears in person. Judge Taylor appoints Atticus to defend Tom Robinson, a black man who has become accused of raping a young white woman, Mayella Ewell. Although many of Macomb's citizens disapproved, Atticus agrees to defend Tom to the best of his ability. Other children taunt Jim and Scout for Atticus' actions, calling him a lover. Scout is tempted to stand up for her father, honor by fighting, even though he has told her not to. One night, Atticus faces a group of men intent on lynching Tom. This crisis is averted in an unexpected manner. Scout, Jim, and Dill show up, and Scout inadvertently breaks the mob's mentality by recognizing and talking to classmates' father, and the would-be lynchers disperse. Atticus does not want Jim and Scout to be present at Tom Robinson's trial. No seat is available on the main floor, but the Reverend Skiles invites Jim, Scout, and Dill to watch them from the colored balcony. Atticus establishes that Mayella and Bob Ewell are lying. It is revealed that Mayella made sexual advances towards Tom, subsequently resulting in her being beaten by her father. The townspeople refer to the Ewells as white trash, who are not to be trusted, but the jury convicts Tom regardless. Jim's faith in justice is badly shaken. Atticus is hopeful that he can get the verdict overturned, but Tom is shot and killed while trying to escape from prison. Despite Tom's conviction, Bob Ewell is humiliated by the events of the trial. Atticus explains that he's destroyed Ewell's last shared credibility at that trial. Ewell vows revenge, spitting in Atticus' face, trying to break into the judge's house and menacing Tom Robinson's widow. Finally, he attacks Jim and Scout while they are walking home on the dark night after the school's Halloween pageant. Jim suffers a broken arm in the struggle, but amid the confusion, someone comes to the children's rescue. The mysterious man carries Jim home, where Scout realizes that it is Bo Radley. Sheriff Tate arrives and discovers Ewell's dead from a knife wound. Atticus believes that Jim was responsible, but Tate is certain it was Boo. The sheriff decides that to protect Boo's privacy, he will report that Ewell simply fell on his own knife during the attack. Boo asks Scout to walk him home after she says goodbye to him, and at the front door, he disappears, never to be seen again by Scout. While standing on Radley's porch, Scout imagines life from Boo's perspective. This is just a very brief twist to the plot that I found interesting, that I think that illustrates how far we've come, but still how far we have to go in today's society. So I chose To Kill a Mockingbird for its effect on society, and also it gives us insight to the thoughts of the Old South, but also recognizes how we must continue to learn from our past to assure the proud future that many of us deserve. So it's a pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to review this book, and hopefully in the near future we can continue to have such get-togethers. So thank you all.
All right, guys. Our next reader is one of our history professors, Dr. Ed Wood. He received his first degree, his bachelor's degree, from the University of Iowa. He has received a master's degree from the University of Nebraska in history, a PhD from the University of Nebraska in history, and you were pursuing a master's degree in geography from Marshall. And I believe you've spent some time in the Marines and the Army. And you came to GSC in 2006. 2004. You published your book in In 2006, that's what I've got. So I don't know, I actually do not know what he's reading today, but I brought a copy of his book up here and set up here. So there's Mud. Also the other reader, the last reader, Mr. Skiles, his books are up here also. For even checkout later after the function. But at this time, I would love to welcome Dr. Ed Wood to come up and give us a reading.
Actually, I would normally, I've given this presentation before, so it's just basically a rehash. I didn't create anything specifically for this, but I had a video clip that I won't be able to present, because I might start off with a joke. It was actually kind of a humorous clip showing British soldiers in the mud, about knee-deep, thigh-deep in the mud. That's the clip, but like I said, I don't think I have the behind it, so it's probably not going to run. Anyway, I'm not reading from my book that's up there. There's also actually painted on the wall out here, which is most flattering. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And I think I got 20 minutes. So in the past, I've kind of talked about the publication process. So if I go a little early, I'll say a little bit things how it got published. So I had to develop a topic for my dissertation. At the time, I had a photograph of myself standing. I had been in the Army for 3, I was in the Marines for 4, and when I was in Germany, we had a lot of mud. I needed a topic for my dissertation, was having a hard time. But as you can tell by my physique, I go to the fridge a lot. And an old girlfriend of mine had made a refrigerator magnet of my standing in the mud. And each time I went to that fridge, I'm like, there was a lot of mud that day. Boy, there was a lot of mud that day. Okay? Finally, just kind of clicks, epiphany. Mud. I don't think I've read anybody write about mud. So I went to my advisor and I said, I think about writing on mud's influence on warfare. And he's like, bingo, you got it, there's your topic. So went with that, wrote the dissertation. There are, hopefully, I'm not sure if you'll be able to catch them or not, but this is largely some photographs from the National Archives, but a large number of it are cartoons from Bill Malden. If anybody knows who Bill Malden is, there's a lot of cartoons, because he knew about mud, and he wrote cartoons about mud. So how does one approach the topic of mud? First, it's rather difficult since very few authors index mud. Okay? In all my readings, the only guy is Martin Gilbert. His book on the First World War, he actually indexes mud. Anything else about mud? I'm going to have to go through each individual book, skimming it for mud. So I told friends and family about the topic. I said, if you ever come across a book that mentions mud and warfare, just tell me the title, tell me the page, and I'll look it up. So friends were most beneficial. Soldiers have known for centuries just how significant mud is in military operations. The historians have not recognized its importance, so it's not written about a lot. Only 3, John Collins' Military Geography, Battlegrounds, edited by Michael Stevenson, and Harold Winters' Battling the Elements, examined mud. But they understood it only as part of the entire environment's look at the subject. I basically, none analyzed mud's influence on the individual combatant, mud's types, and its phases. Therefore, this work's purpose is to examine mud's influence on mobility, on combatants and their material over the centuries and throughout the world. The book uses veterans' memoirs, archival sources, personal interviews, and secondary sources as evidence. Is that the new one? Is that the next one? Did that go?
You did.
Okay, all right. The manuscript begins by defining mud, and that was very interesting. I went to the geography department and said, can you give me a definition of mud? And I remember the geographer was like, well, that's a great question. What is mud? Nobody can define mud. Okay? I did finally find a 1944 test. They were trying to find out the proper inflation rate for tires, how high and how low to put the air in the tires. They defined mud. And here's it. There's two types. Type 1 mud and Type 2 mud. Type 1 mud is bottomless mud. That if you get stuck in it, it will not hit a hard surface. The wheels will just turn or the tracks will just turn. Type 1. Type 2, there's actually a hard surface beneath it. But there's Type 2A, which is the mud with a large liquid content. This is it's got a cleaning quality to it. If you were to throw a bunch of Type A mud onto the wall, it would slide down the wall and clean in a sense. Even though it's filthy dirty, it would clean in a sense. Versus Type 2B, where if you threw it on the wall, it sticks. Okay? Those are different types of mud, as defined by the Army. All mud has certain characteristics. It is soft, it is adhesive, it is slippery. It also has effects. One effect is churnability. Napoleon's old guard learned at Waterloo of mud's churnability when they struggled over the battlefield in the engagement's last minutes. Another trait is mud's dampening effect. During Vietnam, Gunnery Sergeant Alan Kellogg received the Medal of Honor after he pressed a grenade into the mud and then covered it with his body. He survived the blast and learned of mud's dampening effect. Mud also has a suction capacity. Witnesses remember horses losing their shoes in Russia during World War II, hung around his neck rather than lose them in Guadalcanal. Rex Hamrick of West Virginia remembers using C4, an explosive, to loosen the grip of mud around tracks in Vietnam. Mud also has camouflage aspect. During the Spanish-American War, American soldiers wearing blue coats covered themselves with mud to reduce the visibility to snipers. During World War II, Japanese troops covered their bayonets with mud to reduce the shine at nighttime. I basically the one thing that's me into this book is dividing mud by its temporal phases. Permanent mud, seasonal mud, and random mud. The work's first half delineates these three kinds. In my research, it became apparent to classify them based on when they're around. Military commanders knew with certainty that mud existed in permanent features like swamps, marshes, and bogs. They knew that unless there was a severe drought, mud was surely present and had to be considered in any plans. I used the Battle of New Orleans as an example. In addition, I take a moment in this chapter to highlight the different food metaphors used to describe mud. For instance, soldiers referred to it as molasses, chocolate syrup, as being greasy, and that their weapons and equipment could become caked with mud. When one British officer was told to strengthen his position, he responded, quote, "It's impossible to consolidate porridge," unquote. Also in the Civil War, Confederate soldiers joked that the town of Tullahoma, Tennessee, derived its name from the combination of the ancient Greek word tulla for mud and homa meaning more mud. Seasonal mud occurred when predictable rainy seasons or thaws like the Russian Rasputitsa and the monsoon appeared. To explain the point, Germany's drive on Moscow and the campaign in Burma during World War II served as primary examples. During the Vietnam War, the United States launched Project Popeye, which was a deliberate attempt to lengthen the monsoon over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We actually seeded clouds in the hopes that they would rain more, so it increased the mud on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and slow supplies coming into South Vietnam. Random mud was the least predictable. It had derived from local thaws and summer storms. The book points to the Battle of Waterloo. I used the Battle of Waterloo. I used the Battle of Kursk and the Battle of the Reichswald as examples. Waterloo is a delay action. In military terms, I'm trying to trade space for time. Kursk was a front-size battle, the size of thousands of miles. And in the northern part, it's dry as toast, and in the southern part, it's terribly muddy. And the Reichswald was an unexpected thaw that created mud when the snow melted too quickly than anybody could react to. I noticed after writing the dissertation and my publisher seeing the need for another chapter, that of one group of soldiers seemed to have an especially difficult time dealing with mud, and that was engineers. Therefore, I went back and crafted a new chapter to highlight their unique experience. I haven't read the captions to you, but this one, there's an officer in a Jeep and he's like saying, damn fine road, man, damn fine road. Okay. The manuscript's second half examines mud's effect on the morale, health, and fatigue of combatants. And this one basically says, do you remember that warm mud from the summer? Okay. Random mud, let's see, here. With the individual as the focus, the work explained how mud caused discomfort and lowered morale. The chapter concerns mud on the body, clothes, and how long durations in the mud lowered fighting spirit. Bill Malden, the cartoonist here, wrote, if you've not experienced the conditions on the Italian front, if you don't know, and you want to know what it's like to be on the Italian front, he says, dig a hole in your backyard while it is raining. Sit in the hole until the water climbs above your knees. Pour cold mud down your shirt collar and sit there for 2 days. Now you know what it feels like to be in Italy. One of the things that separates my book from others that do give some attention to mud is that my work discusses how mud affected health. Mud caused illness, hampered casualty of action, and when deep enough it killed. I have at least 3 different examples, primarily during World War I, of men who did not have the strength to move and basically succumbed to the mud. They drowned in the mud. Mud also enhanced exhaustion and caused vehicles and weapons to malfunction. In notable instances, such as at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, French Foreign Legionnaires died from fatigue caused by working for too long and too hard in deep mud. The chapter also alludes to fatigue in vehicles and the crews that operate and maintain them in muddy conditions. This chapter includes mud and weapon malfunctions. To highlight this problem, I drew on the experiences of the Chachot machine rifle of World War I, which basically had magazines with rounds in them, but they weren't closed, so mud would just simply clog into and jam the weapon. To free it, frequently men urinated on the magazine to try and clear the mud out, the best sort of solvent they could have. And finally, mud was a key factor in many military campaigns, and veterans of those battles understood the fact. However, its influence on military history has never received the attention from historians that it deserves, thus this work is a noteworthy expansion of historical knowledge. Okay. The publication process. I'll say a few things about that. As some of you are aware, to receive a PhD in history requires writing about 300 pages of original research. I had always been told that one way to help achieve tenure is to be published. It helped. When I finished my degree, my advisor liked my dissertation topic, thought I would need to do more research on all aspects of soil before anyone would publish me. I thought that mud by itself was good enough, but I was in the process of collecting more data. Anyway, I decided to send it out to a publisher. Again, I thought I would shoot for the moon and decided to send my idea to a commercial press. I did not send it to an academic press, I sent it to a commercial press. I thought that it was original enough that someone might bite. I had been advised to choose a press based on the books that I had that published similar material. The only book of a similar nature was John Collins' Military Geography, and he went through Brassey's, so I sent it to Brassey's, who then changed their name to Potomac Books Incorporated. And they've since been bought out by the University of Nebraska Press, but I was told, and I never checked, but I was told, they made it clear, don't just Google Potomac Books. It has to be Potomac Books, Inc. Without the ink, it's pornography. So, Potomac Books, Inc. Anyway, checking their website, they asked that potential officers send a 2-page prospectus. I sent it around Thanksgiving Day, and over Christmas break 2004, I received a letter requesting that I send the entire man. And he said kind of, This is a very quirky book. It's very sort of esoteric, and I like quirky. And I said, I'm your man. Okay, can't find much more esoteric than this. He said they would want some changes in photographs and offered me a deal of an advance of $2,000 and $500 to acquire photos. I spent a week in the National Archives going through photographs, signal core photographs, looking for anything with mud, soil of pretty much any form. The publisher returned the manuscript with some initial edits. Therefore, in the summer of 2005, I had a chapter on mud and engineers, and I rewrote the conclusion. I spent a week also at the United States Army's Historical Institute in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Once my publisher accepted the manuscript, and we agreed on the photos. They also let me sort of look at the perspective cover, dust jacket cover. It was a photo from Bougainville. It's a famous photo. I've seen it lots of times. Anyway, about the book was, oh, there it is. The book was published in 2006. This is Bougainville here. Here in Nebraska, I get a call out of nowhere about, well, what did I say, what, 2008, 2009? The guys, and there's a man's like, you wrote a book about mud? Yeah. It says you got a picture of Bougainville in the front. Yeah. It says, if the picture were out, I'm the 7th guy back. Okay. And he then went on to relate that this man had been killed by a sniper, this one survived. He basically told me of the history of these men on this front cover. And somewhere, I have it, but very interesting that he said, like I said, if the picture is cut off, it goes a little bit longer. He says, I know the picture on the 7th guy from the right, but I know these gentlemen, I know what happened to them. So, rather interesting. That's the presentation.
Thank you again, Dr. Wood. All right, we have now came to our third and final reader for today's function. He is Mr. Jesse Skiles. Mr. Skiles is a 1987 Glenville State College graduate. That's a pretty big accomplishment in itself. I know he worked for the newspapers here on campus, was a sports writer, I believe was editor for 1 year. His senior year there. He went on to be a coach, a track and cross-country coach for several years. I know the most recent would have been at Wesleyan. And he's worked as a sports writer also for the Clarksburg Exponent. And I personally believe he's a very good historian, a sports historian for the region. So at this time, I'd like to welcome him. He's also published 2 separate books, Mountaineer Dreams, and also DuPont Football History up here. So I'm not sure what he's reading, but it may have something to do with those 2 books. But at this time, I welcome Jesse. Thank you.
Thank you a bunch, Jason. I just want to thank you for, you and Dr. for the invite and for allowing me to be a part of this. The basic crux of this book, Mountaineer Dreams, which we published in 2005, was growing up West Virginian and about chasing the dream that I wanted to be the head track coach at West Virginia University and harboring that dream and chasing it. But how I came to write the book, first is a line from the book, a little self-disclosure that I operate for years, and I still operate, with a very obsessive compulsive habit. At the end of each day, I make a journal entry of sorts, making special note of who did something good for me that day, and if applicable, who did something wrong. This version of keeping score has allowed me to keep a solid track record over the years of who my real friends are and who the jerks are. I also grade myself, noting if I was as I should be to everyone that day. So anyway, I went back through those journals and I was able to follow the emotions and chasing this dream and how it evolved. And I was able to get it all formulated, and really it only took a few weeks to get it all in the manuscript. Of course, there was the editing process and everything, but we got it got it published. Here's the beginning of it, and this was the starting point when I was able to trace back a memory. It was a crisp, clear morning in the university town of Morgantown, West Virginia. And as a small 5-year-old boy, I was pretty overwhelmed by the environment which I found myself engulfed. My beloved West Virginia Mountaineers were facing the arch rival Pitt Panthers on homecoming. And there was an electric feeling in the air. It was definite. It was all around me. Something I'd never felt before. My father and I were walking amidst a sea of people on the street high above Old Mountaineer Field, walking in an area that I would later know as the Mountain Lair. The excitement had my heart racing. But as my dad bought a newspaper, one that sported both teams' rosters, all I could think about was how scared I felt. So many people. I could only think of wanting to cling to my old man. And years later, I look back on this particular day, it dawned on me that this was my first long trip from my home in eastern Kanawha County, outside of Charleston. Growing up in the valley, my longest trip to date is when we took our cattle to the stockyards in Spencer, one county and 40 miles away, which was close to 8 hours one way, had drained my young energy. But this was the unbelievable new world. This was the Mountaineers of my radio dreams. One thing which I'll always be thankful for is the fact my parents raised me to love my home state. Radio voices like Jack Fleming and Woody O'Hara, they were like part of the family. My Saturday mornings, I could not wait for Saturday morning, counting down the hours to Mountaineer football. My dad and I would talk about the game as we fed the chickens, went through all the morning feedings with our dogs, and as we enjoyed my mom's pancake and bacon breakfast. As always, a poetic Fleming rendition of the preview of the game was followed with my favorite words in my 5-year-old world. Statewide, the Mountaineers are on the air. This would be followed with the song, Those West Virginia Hills, a song that still gives me goosebumps. Names like Bob Gresham, Mike Sherwood, Jim Braxton, Carl Cornell, they were part of my daily vernacular. In '69, the fall of '69, I was obsessed with my Mountaineer heroes. I could not believe that we were actually going to see the real Mike Sherwood that day, in just a matter of hours. I simply cannot imagine that any other 5-year-old in the world could have been feeling as much excitement as I did that day, high up on that hill in Morgantown. Oh, actually seeing my beloved Mountaineers running out on the field with firing muskets, the sounds of the band playing the fight song, I was starry-eyed throughout the day. That day had a profound effect on me. I will never forget that little boy high on the hill above the stadium clinging to his dad, scared to death of the magnitude of it all, but totally swollen with the pride of being a true West Virginian. So that day, we went from that, and I went through my notes and was looking at just some things about being a West Virginian and some things that were ingrained growing up, in southern West Virginia. That year after that game, when my dad took me to the first Mountaineer game in '69, they hired a coach named Bobby Bowden in 1970. And I wrote some pieces about, kind of relaying that. My parents loved Bowden, and still to this day. Our parents were still with us then. Just like Rich Rodriguez. Bowden had quite a following from all the backwoods hollers and small towns throughout West Virginia because, as my parents used to say, he talks like us. Hearing Coach Bowden on his weekly radio show, it always felt like one of my uncles chatting with us in the living room. For me, that time in life ushered in the realization of what it means to be a West Virginian. I began to hear comedians tell Appalachian jokes. I know when my family would go on treks to see the relatives in Ohio playing with kids up there, I began to hear what people's perceptions were of West Virginia. I began to develop a hardcore pride, not only in my state, but in our culture. So what does it mean to be a West Virginian? Simply put, we should be the wealthiest state in the Union, with all the lumber and minerals that have been taken from these hills. Our people gave their lives and poured years of sweat into working the beautiful land of this great state. But in the end, there wasn't a lot in it for us. Like many of today's West Virginians, I'm a product of that generation, a descendant who felt the frustration that our parents and grandparents felt. Both of my grandparents worked long stints in the coal mines of Camels Creek in eastern Kanawha County. What my grandparents' experiences taught me is that West Virginians are not only hardworking, but they're very resilient. They're survivors. Yes, there's people out there who will still speak demeaningly of our state and our culture, call us hillbillies. Those people just don't understand. I'm a son of Appalachia, and I'm damn proud of it. So, put that piece in there and just talk about growing up in the southern part of the state, experiences at DuPont High School, the events that led me to coming to Glenville State College, and how few people from eastern Kanawha County even go to college. Many don't even graduate high school at that time. But to get to come here, and the folks in the English department, as you've heard me say several times, there was Wayne DeRose, Barbara Tedford, changed my life. Changed my life. And getting to be a work study for Coach Jesse Lilly up here, it changed my life. And I began to really hone in that this dream was possible. And then Coach Lilly hired me as a head coach here when I was 22. And, you know, I followed, it takes you all through that. Family, chasing the dream, being the head coach here, being the head coach at Wesleyan. I was there for 26 years. But in 2003, legendary West Virginia University Hall of Fame track coach Marty Pushkin retired. And went through the whole process of hearing that news, all the preparation, everything we went through to apply for the job. And then I became a finalist and went through the phone interview, became a finalist on campus. Get the job. I didn't get the job. And so I went through a couple of years where I wasn't in a good place. But, you know, lost a marriage during that time, and was trying to, you know, rally myself. And there was a night that it all came together. I was able to reinvigorate everything. Where I come back and say, I gotta be a better father, gotta be a better man, gotta be a better coach, gotta be a better employee, and really embrace and count my blessings every day with what we had with the team over there we had at Wesleyan. And the new dream was the job I have right now. And I was not going to be as obsessed with it. I was just going to try to do right, be the best coach we could be, try to be a better dad. And in the end, as some of you heard, you know, just a month after this book was published, I purchased a farm that where I still reside over in Walkersville, with the hope that someday I could find my way back to Glenville State College. That's why I bought it there. And if it never happened, that was fine. But it was a dream, and thank God it was here. And this was the night where that happened. The last chapter of the book is called, see, I'm giving you the Cliff's Notes here. It was a night of reckoning. It was an uneventful weekend in the summer of 2005. I was covering baseball games for the Clarksburg Exponent in Morgantown. And I decided to spend that night up there with my buddy Sean Clary, who's now the head coach at WVU. Maybe it was a cathartic night of solitary reflection. I settled in at the brew pub just off the banks of the Monongahela River. I had consumed very little alcohol over the last 8 months, but on this night, the fresh brew was going down smooth. I was getting deep and philosophical. I began to tell an older gentleman lady beside me about my mountaineer dream. Could I ever get over that dark day in April of 2003? When I'd certainly had a beer or 4 too many, I felt the urge to walk and reflect. The old Mountaineer Field House was only a few hundred yards away, and that was my first destination. I stood in front of the historic structure and closed my eyes. I honestly believe there is something mystical and magical about history of place. As my eyes shut, I could hear the distinct voice of Jack Fleming off in the distance. I pictured my dad and his brothers as young men back in eastern Kanawha County listening to the radio, hanging on Fleming's every word. I pictured Jerry West draining jumper after jumper, beating player after player off the dribble. I pictured Hot Rod Hundley putting on ball handling displays. It all happened right here. I felt a warmth inside, and I felt my arms covered with chill bumps. This was indeed a very special night. I was reaching out and coming into touch about everything from my youth, West Virginia, and the amazing bond that West Virginians have. This is what my mountaineer dream was all about. I then walked up the hill and about the downtown campus, just wondering. Then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was in the spot where I was clinging to my dad that October morning back in 1969. So much had happened since that beautiful day when my mountaineer dream began. I thought about how much I loved my family and how much sacrifice I had done to them. I thought about all the mountaineer dreams all the moments over the years. The site of Old Mountaineer Field was just over the hill and all the memories that it held. I was thinking that fateful phone call from Russ Sharp ringing in my ears that awful day in 2003. Was my dream over? And what kind of life could I possibly have after missing out on my dream? I could only think of that scared little boy back in 1969 clinging to his daddy, scared to death of the magnitude of it all, but so swollen with mountaineer pride. I shut my eyes and I could remember that exact feeling. I broke down and tears began pouring out of my eyes. My dream was in limbo. I was now a grown man of 41. It was hitting me full force. That dream that was hatched some 36 years ago and pursued so fiercely, it may never be realized, ever. The tears were now pouring out like a waterfall. I reached out to a nearby tree and held on. My dad was nowhere around. So that was, that night, that was, that led to me being right here, right now. But anyway, if you get a chance, I'm proud to put my heart into it, and we're doing a lot of history books right now. Lady Pioneers is at the publisher right now, so we're doing a few, so thank you.
Well, that concludes our readers for this evening. Again, I would like everybody to mingle around a little bit for the foreseeable future here and check out some of the books. Of course, we have Mr. Skiles' book. We actually have 2 copies of it. So if there's 2 people here who'd like to check it out, we've got 2 copies. We have 2 copies of Dr. Wood's book. So those are there. And then the Sis Lynn stuff's over here also. Feel free to grab a duplicate, a replica of the Sis Lynn article, those sort of things. And we hope to continue the Little Kanawha Reading Series. We've had a little bit of a hiccup with the COVID stuff, and we've had a couple cancellations. And hopefully in the spring we can bring some of those folks back and keep on bringing this stuff together. But I do appreciate everybody coming by, and